And there's this creature that uses the smell of fresh bread as bait, and as soon as you get close it attacks. It all started on Tuesday. I was returning home late, around midnight. Work was exhausting me, and some depressing music was playing in my headphones, and all I wanted was to get to bed. My path led through an old neighborhood with 2-story houses that, by some miracle, hadn't been torn down in the city center. Every other street lamp was lit, casting long shadows, and then, in the middle of this sleepy kingdom of silence and semi-darkness, I smelled it. The smell, at first, light, barely perceptible. I even thought I was imagining it, but then it became stronger, rich, warm, with notes of butter and something sweet, like a cinnamon roll. The smell of freshly baked goods, so strong that my mouth immediately started to water. I took out my headphones. Silence. Only this incredible aroma. I stopped and began sniffing the air, turning my head. The scent led to one of the oldest houses on the street. The only thing that stood out was a massive wooden door leading into the basement directly from the street, and the scent was coming from there, seeping through the cracks. My feet carried me to that door. The scent was enticing, promising something incredibly pleasant. I approached the door. It was old, made of dark, dried-out wood, with a heavy forged ring instead of a handle. I pulled, and it opened. The scent was so thick you could almost touch it, and I descended. The steps were stone, worn and slippery from dampness. With each step down, the smell of bread grew stronger. It filled my nostrils, settled on my tongue, and I felt as if I had dived into warm milk. The anxiety that had been above evaporated, replaced by a kind of savor. I was sure that something amazing awaited me downstairs. When I went down, I found myself in a long basement, exposed brick, dimly lit by a single bulb. There was no bakery here, no ovens, no racks of baked goods, no flour. Instead, a long, roughly hewn wooden table stood along the entire far wall, and on it, and next to it were sacks, regular burlap sacks, the kind used for potatoes or grain. About 20 of them, maybe more. They came in different shapes and sizes. Some were tightly packed, others seemed almost empty. A smell emanated from them, from the fabric itself, from the air around them. I walked closer. What the hell? Why do sacks smell like bread? I reached out and touched one of them. The fabric was strangely damp and warm to the touch, and then I noticed movement. One of the sacks, standing in the middle of the table, twitched, first faintly, then again. It was as if someone or something inside was trying to turn over. I jerked my hand, my heart sinking. I froze, peering into the sacks, and I saw others moving too. Not all, but many. Smooth, rolling movements, as if large, heavy lumps of dough were churning inside. All the charm of the smell instantly vanished. I became scared, truly scared. I wanted to turn around, to rush up, but some unhealthy curiosity held me in place. And then one of the sacks, the one closest to me, began to untie. The knot at its neck slowly slid apart. The burlap sack burst open, and from the darkness of the sack, it appeared. First, I saw something pale, round and smooth. It slowly poked its head out, and I realized it was a head, completely bald, almost transparent. But that wasn't the most frightening thing. The eyes. This creature had no eyelids. Enormous, bulging, completely black and shiny. They stared into space, unblinking, and beneath them was a mouth, a wide, lipless slit. When it opened slightly, I saw there were no teeth inside. The creature slowly, with a wet squelching sound, pulled its shoulders out of the sack. It was humanoid in build, but its body was as pale as its head. Its skin glistened, as if oiled, and the smell, God, that smell, it became unbearable. Now it wasn't just coming from the sacks. It was coming from this creature, concentrated, cloying, the smell of bread, mixed with something else, the smell of raw meat, the smell of river mud. The creature pulled itself completely out of the sack, and clumsily jumped off the table onto the floor. It was the height of a teenager, thin, with long thin limbs, that moved as if there were no bones in the joints. It took a step toward me. I couldn't move. My body was frozen with terror. I watched it slowly approach, and the only thought in my head was Mice Baker. I don't know why. The word simply floated into my mind. It wasn't the bread that baked it. It was the bait itself. In that moment, I felt something new. Along with a wave of fear, a desire arose inside me to approach him, to touch his smooth, pale skin, to look into his eyes. The scent penetrated straight to my brain, and whispered to me, "Come here. It will be good. It will be warm. It will be delicious." I felt my leg twitch as I took a tiny step forward. This involuntary step brought me out of my stupor. Like an electric shock ran through my body. I realized that another second and I would stay. I would go to meet this creature. Like a rabbit goes where it goes. I turned and rushed to the stairs. I had never run like this in my life. I didn't hear footsteps behind me, but I felt it was there. The scary thing was that part of me didn't want to run. It begged me to go back to the warmth, to that enticing smell. The voices in my head argued. One panicked, driving me upstairs. The other, ingratiating and sweet, was pulling me back down to the basement. One more bite. Just one. Just once. Inhale. Will you like it? I flew out of the basement like a champagne cork. The door behind me slammed shut on its own. With a slam, when I kicked it from the inside, I tripped and fell on the anteroom. The fresh, cool night air hit my face. I realized the smell was gone. It had vanished, as if it had never been there. I lay on the asphalt, trying to catch my breath. My ears were ringing. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. I don't know how long I lay there. Maybe a minute. Maybe 10. Then, staggering, I got to my feet, and ran without looking back. A week passed. Every time I close my eyes, I see him. Those black shiny eyes, that lipless slit. I can still smell the phantom scent of bread. Sometimes it appears suddenly, when I'm riding the subway, or sitting in the office. And every time, I'm overcome with icy dread, and a desire to go back. I don't walk down that street anymore. I make a huge detour to go around it. But yesterday I passed a bakery. A regular, real bakery. And when I smelled the freshly baked goods, I froze. My heart stopped. For a second I thought I was standing in front of that basement door again. I don't know what it was. Maybe some kind of creature that hunts, using smells as bait. Maybe something that lives in these old basements. I only know one thing. The baker is still there. He's waiting for someone hungry and tired to follow his scent. And the worst thing is, I'm not sure I'll be able to run away next time. Last night, someone was digging in my garden, but the funny thing is, I live alone. It all started around 2 in the morning. I was glued to my phone as usual. My house is my grandmother's old dacha. There's nothing around but forest, and the nearest meeting place is a kilometer away. The only living soul is a cat, Murzik, who was sleeping on the bed, and then I heard a quiet monotonous sound, like someone sticking a shovel into dry earth. At first, I thought nothing of it. Well, maybe the wind, maybe some animal, but the sound didn't stop. Someone was really standing there and digging. My heart started pounding. I crept to the window and pulled back the curtain. The moon was shining dimly. The entire garden was drowning in shadow. Mud patches, old apple trees, a shed in the corner. Everything seemed to be as usual. The sound was coming from the far end of the garden, from where the old fence separated my plot from the forest. What the hell? Who could be digging in my garden at 2 in the morning? A thief? What are they looking for? Grandma's treasure? Nonsense. I thought about calling the police. Hello? Someone is overly enthusiastic about gardening right here in my backyard. They'll think I'm drunk or crazy. So I did the stupidest thing possible. Like the heroine of all the stupid horror movies, I decided to go and see. I grabbed the heaviest flashlight I could find, a big metal one, the kind you could knock someone over the head with if necessary. Murzik raised his head like a deer, meowed and went back to sleep. Traitor. Pulling on my old rubber boots, I quietly opened the back door. The hinges creaked, and I froze listening. They stopped digging. Silence. Okay, calm down, I whispered to myself. It's just a hedgehog, a very determined hedgehog, with a shovel. I stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cold, smelling of damp earth and pine. I turned on my flashlight. Its beam cut through the darkness. I moved it across the garden. Nothing. Then I pointed the beam to that very far corner where the sound was coming from. And then I saw it. The ground. It was moving. I'm not talking about a slight tremor. I'm talking about an entire chunk of earth. About a meter by a meter, rhythmically pulsating. It was rising. And I gave it a push. As if it were breathing. This was abnormal. My brain tried to find an explanation. A pipe had burst. Crow Troit. But the scale and rhythm were wrong. The earth was seething. Cobia of the dark soil were being pushed upward. As if from within. I took a step. My boots squelched dully through the grass. The flashlight beam trembled in my shaking hands. I walked forward. I had to find out what the hell was going on in my garden. As I got closer, details became visible about 5 meters away. It wasn't just the earth moving. Something was pushing it from below. And then I saw them. Hands were sticking out of the ground. Human hands. I swear my heart stopped. I stopped breathing. They weren't crawling out of some hole. They were inside the earth. And trying to get out. Their fingers were long. Pale. Covered in dirt. Their nails were broken. And clogged with black earth. They were moving at a crazy speed. Biting into the soil. Throwing it aside. But they weren't trying to get out. They were digging deeper. I stood rooted to the spot. The flashlight beam froze on this impossible nightmarish scene. The door, the hands, worked in perfect harmony. They sank into the ground. And a fountain of soil flew up. They were incredibly fast. As if I were watching a video on fast forward. My brain screamed at me. This is a dream. You're overtired. You fell asleep on the couch. Wake up. But the cold night air was real. The weight of the flashlight in my hand was real. And the sight of those ghostly white hands digging in my garden was terrifyingly real. They seemed unaware of me or the light. They were completely absorbed in their task. What were they looking for? I was rooted to the ground, watching as those hands, terrifying intent, obliterated the earth. Where is everything else? And then the most idiotic, the most insane thought occurred to me. I had to ask. My voice came out as a stifled whisper, barely audible. Who are you? The moment those words escaped my lips, everything stopped. The hands froze. One froze in midair, and soil fell from its pale fingers. The other one sank halfway into the soil. The rhythmic movement stopped. The night became completely silent again. I held my breath. The silence stretched on for an eternity. I stared at the 2 motionless human hands protruding from the earth. The ones I had just asked a question of. Then, very slowly, the fingers of the raised hand clenched into a fist. The other hand pulled itself out of the earth with a soft squelching sound. And they began digging again. But this time even faster. It was madness. Earth flew in all directions. Clods hitting my legs. My face. The earth around them trembled. And I heard a low thud coming from beneath the surface. I backed up and tripped over a rock. I fell painfully onto my back. The flashlight flying out of my hands. The dug-up area of Dolozo earth grew wider, the soil crumbling around the edges. A dark hole began to form. The hum grew louder, turning into a vibration that I felt with my whole body. And then the ground simply caved in. With a sickening crump, a huge chunk of my garden collapsed inward, leaving behind a gaping black hole. It was a perfect circle, about 2 meters in diameter. The hands disappeared, and I crawled back, my nails scratching at the damp grass. I couldn't take my eyes off that hole. It was absolute blackness. Just emptiness. And then something appeared in the darkness. A pair of eyes. They lit up in the depths of the hole, glowing with a faint light. Enormous, round, unblinking, and they were looking straight at me. Before I could even process what I was seeing, another pair of eyes opened next to them, and another, and another. Within seconds, the entire blackness of the hole was filled with dozens of eyes. All sizes. Small, large. They didn't move, didn't blink. They just stared at me. I didn't see any bodies or faces. Only eyes. Finally I screamed. And I didn't stop screaming until I ran to the house, slammed the door and locked it. Since then, I've been sitting here, in the corner of the living room, with all the lights on. It's already getting light. But I don't care. I won't go to the window. I won't go outside. The hole is still there. And the eyes. I know they're still there. And they're looking at me. What the hell is under my garden? It's 1 a.m. I'm sitting on the living room floor. I've blocked the door to the kitchen and the bathroom. I'm not alone in my apartment anymore. It all started an hour ago. A typical insomniac decided to go to the kitchen for a drink of water. I went into one, in the old Stalenka, where the pipes constantly make some kind of noise. I'm used to the occasional knock, the monotonous drip 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 of the kitchen faucet. No matter how hard I turn it, it was just background noise. Today the noise was different. I went into the kitchen without turning on the light. The moon through the window provided enough light. I went to the sink. The drops fell with the same dismal regularity. I reached out to turn the valve all the way to the stop once again, and at that moment the dripping stopped. There was complete silence. I froze, my hand hanging in midair, and then, from the round hole in the faucet, where the water should have flowed, something braided appeared. It was a finger. Long, white, as if soaked in milk. The nail was yellowish and transparent. It moved slowly, hesitantly, like a blind man feeling an unfamiliar space. One swung left, then right. I hadn't drunk or consumed anything. I was simply tired, but the finger didn't disappear, and then it got worse. Next to the first, a second appeared, then a third, a fourth. Last, squeezing through with difficulty, was the thumb. It was a hand. The skin on it was thin, and bluish veins were visible beneath. The hand bent at the joints with an unnatural crunch that I felt more than heard. Fingers grabbed the chosen handle of the faucet. They squeezed so hard I heard the metal creak. The hand tensed, stretching the skin, and began to pull. It was pulling itself out of the faucet. From behind the hole, with a disgusting wet sound, a wrist began to emerge, then a forearm, then an elbow appeared, and I saw a shoulder, and then a head emerged from the faucet, pale, without an eye. Instead of eyes, there were simply smooth hollows on a stretched skin. There was no nose either, only 2 small slits, like a reptile. This year it opened its mouth. The mouth was simply a slit from one ear to the other. When it stretched, I saw several rows of small teeth. At that moment, I think I screamed, or just made some kind of wheeze, and it kept climbing. It pulled out a body, long, laugh-like, without legs, and plopped into the sink, and then the water started flowing again. Only it wasn't water. A thick, black liquid, smelling of slime, gushed from the faucet, right onto the creature. It flowed around its pale body, and it writhed in it. I have flexible water supply hoses under my sinks. I yanked them with all my strength. There was a cracking sound, and the last of the clean water splashed onto the floor. I ripped them out, cutting off the water supply. The sounds in the kitchen died down. The black liquid stopped flowing. There was silence for a few seconds. I stood there, breathing heavily, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. And then I heard drip, drip. The sound wasn't coming from the kitchen. It was coming from the bathroom. Have you ever heard silence scream? That's exactly what was happening in my apartment. I was standing in the middle of the hallway, between 2 doors. One led to the kitchen, where something was sitting in the sink. The other led to the bathroom, from which came a sound that promised the nightmare wasn't over. He simply changed his location. My feet carried me to the bathroom. The bathroom door was closed, leaving only a narrow gap. I walked over and peered in. Everything looked as usual. Tiles, mirror, washing machine, and bath. Even black liquid was dripping from the faucet. The creature itself was nowhere to be seen. Maybe it hadn't managed to squeeze in here? Maybe it was still in the kitchen? The thought brought a fleeting, idiotic relief. I pushed the door wider and peered in. The air was cold and damp, smelling like a flooded basement. I walked over to the bathtub and looked at the drops. Where they landed, they left black streaks that didn't spread, but lay in lumps. I looked at the drain hole. It was covered with a standard metal mesh plug, and then I noticed something else. The plug was slightly displaced, and something sticking out from underneath it. Thin, dark, like a long hair. And then I realized nist. It wasn't something crawling out of the drain. It was dragging something there. I watched, holding my breath, and saw movement. The tip of a familiar pale finger appeared from under the plug. It found a strand of hair, grabbed it, and slowly, with effort, pulled it in. It was collecting my genetic material. It was dragging a part of me into its watery underworld. What difference did it make whether I pulled the hoses or not? It was already in the system, in the pipes of this house. It could appear anywhere, where there is water. Then, as if in answer to my thoughts, I heard a scratching. It was coming from inside the wall behind which the pipes ran. A quiet, insistent scratching, like rats scratching. The sound began to move. It crawled along the wall from the bathroom towards the living room. I jumped out of the bathroom, slammed the door and slammed the latch. Then I rushed into the kitchen and slammed that too. The scratching on the wall continued. It moved along the living room wall, slowly, methodically. It was looking for the next exit, and I thought I knew which one. The radiator. I'm sitting on the floor. The scratching has stopped, right in the radiator. It's been quiet for about 5 minutes. I look at the old cast iron radiator, and see how the valve on the pipe leading to it slowly, very slowly, begins to turn on its own. It turned counterclockwise. I sat on the floor, like a paralyzed rabbit, and watched. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My brain simply switched off, leaving only the observation function. Steam began pouring out of the valve, unusually hot steam, and black, oily smoke. It smelled just like the liquid from the faucet, a mixture of swamp rot and metal. The smoke grew thicker, filling the corner of the room. The smell brought me back to life. I jumped up, grabbed my keys from the coat rack, and ran outside. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what exactly was trying to crawl out of my radiator. The lock clicked. I threw the door open and flew out into the stairwell. I ran down the stairs, jumping over each step. It seemed to me that this liquid goo was about to creep out from behind every door. Having jumped out into the street, I ran another few meters into a table, before I stopped and turned around. My house, an old, shabby 5-story building. The windows were dark. Everyone was asleep. Nothing unusual. A normal house in a normal sleeping city. I stood in the middle of the street in just a t-shirt, shivering either from the cold or from fear. My throat was dry. I was very thirsty. And in that moment the full scale of the horror dawned on me. Water. It was everywhere. In every apartment. In every building. It was an endless network permeating the entire city. While I was standing there, in the window on the 3rd floor, directly above my apartment, the light came on. I saw the silhouette of my neighbor, Aunt Dasha. She went into the kitchen, probably to get a drink of water too. The light in her kitchen burned for about a minute, then went out and didn't come back on. Suddenly, I saw something in her dark window. A pale spot pressed against the glass. I squinted. It was a face. No eyes. A wide slit mouth. It was looking straight at me. Then the same face appeared in the window next to it, and another one on the 4th floor. They appeared in the windows, silently watching me. After the only one who ran away, I don't know how long I stood there. At some point, I just turned around and walked away. I was walking through the city at night, and I was shaking. I passed a fountain and almost passed out. Now I'm sitting in a cafe on the other side of town. I ordered a coffee, but I can't touch it. I don't know what this creature is. Several hours have passed since then. It's starting to get light, but I don't feel safe. I look at the people around me. They drink tea, coffee, bottled water. They don't know. They turn on the faucet, and don't think about what might come out, instead of water. And if you're listening to this, please be careful. The next time you go to the kitchen at night, listen. If the dripping faucet suddenly stops, run. Just run. And don't look back. I still haven't had a drink, and I don't think I ever will again, because every time I close my eyes, I see that pale finger emerging from the darkness of the faucet, and I know what it's waiting. In the village, my grandmothers used to say that you shouldn't go to the old well by the ravine at night. You, grandson, don't go beyond the edge of the village after dark, especially not to the well. You ask why, and the answer is silence, or they just wave you off, saying it's an evil place, and that's it. And of course, I didn't believe it. I'm a city guy. I came from the capital for the summer to help an old lady with the housework, and also to relax. For me these are just village tales. You know? Every village has its own cursed house, its own witch or wood spirit in the forest. There was a well here, an old log structure of darkened wood, with a rusty chain receding into the impenetrable blackness. During the day, it even looks picturesque, like the setting of a fairy tale. But at night, I admit, it really did have a foreboding air. It stood alone on the very edge of the village, where a steep descent into a ravine began, overgrown with nettles and weeds. For the first month, I honestly avoided it. Not that I was afraid, just out of respect for my grandmother. But boredom in the village is a terrible thing. There's almost no internet. All the entertainment is the river and the vegetable garden. And so, one June night, when I couldn't sleep, and my head was filled with bad thoughts, I decided, why not? What could be there? Well, a drunk guy fell over, or a dog, or just old women at a scary story to keep young people from wandering around at night. I threw on a tracksuit, shoved my feet into sneakers, and left the house. The night was quiet. Not a cricket, not a rustle of leaves. Only my footsteps on the dusty road seemed deafening. Anxiety began to slowly creep up on me. I'd already regretted my idiotic idea 100 times, and then I saw it. The silhouette of the well against the brightening ravine of the sky. It seemed blacker than darkness itself. I slowly approached the edge, clutching the cold, dew-slick logs with my hands. So what? Just a well, I chuckled to myself. I peered inside. From the darkness, clutching the opposite stone edge, two long, incredibly thin hands looked at me. I stood there, clutching this damned log structure, unable to look away. The hands, they were inhuman. The skin was gray, taut, as if about to snap. The fingers were long and crooked, like dry branches. They scraped along the stone. The nails, yellow and thick, left white marks on the damp surface. The sound of this scratching was the only thing that broke the deathly silence. Quiet, methodical. My brain refused to believe it. Now I blinked, and she would disappear. I blinked. The hands didn't disappear. On the contrary, they tensed. The knuckles turned white, and slowly, out of the darkness, it began to rise. First, a head appeared, or what should have been a head, a smooth, elongated oval, where a person's face should have been. There was a gaping hole, not just a dark spot, it was absolute emptiness that stared straight at me. The body continued to rise from the well, it was enormous, sprawling, like a drowned man's, the gray skin, like on his arms, hung in folds, and then I saw the most terrifying thing, the one that made my mind completely swim. Small arms grew around his ribs, dozens of tiny underdeveloped arms, and they were still moving. They thrashed like a tangle of snakes, clinging to each other, scratching at his sprawling torso and the inner walls of the well. Their movements were chaotic. It continued to climb, centimeter by centimeter. 2 large hands, pressed against the edge of the log, the body arched, bones cracked. This entire mass was slowly emerging into the light, and I saw the muscles straining under the gray skin, the small hands on the ribs twitching. The hole where the face should have been was constantly directed at me, and I knew I was prey. It had almost completely crawled out. I still stood there, transfixed. I was a front row spectator at the spectacle of its own end, and then it began to pull out legs. They weren't legs, they were joints, like an insect's. 2 powerful, angular knees emerged from the well, bent at an unnatural angle. They were covered in something like chitin, dark and shiny in the moonlight, long, thin. They ended in cloven hooves that hit the inner wall of the well with a dull thud. The creature assumed a pose to spring. It crouched. It huddled like a spring. A huge body, hung with twitching arms, a hole where its face should have been, and those legs, grasshopper legs. At that moment, the silence exploded. Every dog, Desename Delay, Dlaneshen, like Lugna village barked. The roosters crowed, as if they sensed the crow. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed and a frightened woman's scream rang out. The world around me suddenly woke up. I saw everything as if in slow motion. I saw the muscles on those monstrous legs tense, how 2 large bony hands pushed off the edge of the well, how the small hands on its ribs suddenly froze for a split second, and then they all pointed at me at once. The hole in its face seemed to widen, and it jumped, straight at me.